Shalom, Kal Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha, Kodash. Praises, honor, and glory to thee. True names of the Heavenly Father and His only begotten Son, whom this world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, and also the name of His Holy Spirit. That's what I said in the ancient Hebrew tongue. Double honors, double to the elders and apostles of great millstone, our teachers that surely do well. Peace, love, and salutation to the men, the brethren on the four corners of this world, that continues to spread this word, this gospel in all sincerity and in truth. This is a brother Kalab coming back to you with another bit of edification, the house of Israel, mainly the elect. It's the year 2023, the year that hopefully all the prophecies of the Lord comes to pass. Okay, shalom. All right, 1 Corinthians 11 from verses 26 to 30. The understanding of it, right? This is Apostle Paul obviously writing to the church of Corinth, and he's addressing them on basically order in this chapter here, order, because if we look at verses 2 of the same chapter, which we could start at verses 1, which is very important to do, because again, in the context of any chapter or any subject, it's good to start at the earlier verses to understand, well, how the reader reached, or how, sorry, the writer or the speaker, which is Apostle Paul here in this case, came to those statements that he making in the 26th to 30th verse, right? So in 1 Corinthians 11, we see that it addresses order. 1 Corinthians 11 and verses 1 to 2, be followers of me, even as I also am of Hamashiach. Now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things and keep the ordinances. The word order goes back to ordinances, right? As I delivered them to you. And then he starts to go into order, right? The head of every man is a Mashiach, the head of the woman is the man. Plus he started going to praying and having your head covered and these different things. But when we go down closer now to verses verses 18, he starts to address something in particular. He says, for first of all, when you come together in the church, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it. For there must be also heresies among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest among you. So it had those that was teaching heretic doctrines. Heretic doctrine is a doctrine, contrary to that which is established as fact or true. All right, that which is against the common belief of that faith. All right, or religion. Right. So it had that going on amongst the church of Corinth, and he was addressing that. He said, when you come together, therefore, into one place, this is not to eat the Lord's supper. He said, this is not to eat the Lord's supper. For in eating, everyone take it before other his own supper, and one is hungry, and another is drunken. He said, what? Have ye not houses to eat and to drink in? Or despise ye the church of God, and shame them that have not? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I praise you not. For I received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. So he's now zeroing into what particular event he's speaking of. He was referring to when they came together in one place, or come together in one place, to keep the Lord's Passover, or as it was known, was written in scripture as the Lord's Supper. Because we read in Luke 22, where at the time of the Passover, the Lord kept a supper with his disciples, or he kept the Passover basically with his disciples, right? And he's getting into the mode of that Passover that the Lord kept, because he's highlighting to them that, you see, that same night the Lord broke that bread to eat that Passover, there's a night our Lord was betrayed. So that ain't nothing to come and eat and partake of insincerely, or like it's just a regular gathering. All right, it's not just a regular gathering where you just come and eat and drink and have a good time and nah, like how certain groups would do it. They would have a Passover fashion show. That is not the mode for that. There's a night when the Lord broke bread. He was betrayed to be delivered unto sinners, to be nailed to the cross. Verse 24, it says, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, take, eat, this is my body which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. And I could find that account in the Gospels, right, where the Lord actually did that and actually said those same words. Take, eat, this is my bread, this is my body which is broken for you, this do in remembrance of me, right? And it was the Passover. Now you gotta understand too, what the Lord was doing here is initiating the right mode in which we should now keep the Passover. That's what the Lord was doing there. When he made that statement, he was now initiating the right mode in which we should keep the Passover, because Passovers would have been kept when back in the time of Exodus, the 12th chapter, right, where the command was given to get that sheep, that lamb, without spot and blemish, right? Keep it on to the 14th day at evening, where you would now kill it, right? Put the blood on your doorpost, right? After you put the blood on your doorpost, you're eating haste that night, right? To leave, because they were getting ready to leave Egypt that same night. After they've eaten, they eat in haste to leave. The death angel had to pass and everything. right? And then from that time now, of the initiating of the Passover at that time in Exodus 12, other Passovers would have been kept, and they would have been kept in a feast like manner. Like if you go in the time of Josiah, I believe Josiah kept one of the biggest Passover, right? It had singers, it had all kind of thing going on, right? So it was one of the biggest Passover with a lot of slaying a sheep and whatnot, you know. And likewise with other Passovers that would have been kept after the Exodus 12 chapter Passover. But now the Lord only seen here now, telling them really and truly, we're not let God to eat this. He said with desire. I remember he said with desire. Let me read that for you. It's in the book of Luke chapter 22 and verse 15. And he said unto them, with desire have I desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. So the Lord desired to eat that Passover with them. And it was so fitly done so that he could initiate the mode that they ought to be in, while observing the Passover, in remembrance of him, because he came as that official lamb without spot and blemish, as Apostle Paul would have even highlighted. Let me get the scripture here. Just bear with me a second. This is the book of 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. He says, purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened, for even a Mashiach, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Yahushua is the Passover. He represents the lamb, right? So now, when Yahushua came and he kept it with the disciples, he was setting in that mood to them, right? When you keep the Passover, you're supposed to be keeping it in remembrance of me. Don't just be keeping it in remembrance of Exodus 12. I am your Passover. My blood is going to be shed for you. I am who you have to, my blood is what you have to place on your doorpost, which your doorpost would be a mine. Like it says in Revelation 3 and verses 20. He said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. That door represents your mind. If any man would open, I would come in and whatnot. Right? So he's now giving them the right mode to keep the feast in. Whereas the rest of Israel, while he was telling them that, while he was with them in Luke 22, right, and in the other Gospels where it gives you the account of the Passover that he kept with them, while he was telling them that, the rest of Israel, right, those that were not of the discipleship, outside of that inner circle, they would have been keeping the Passover as they would have regularly done. But the disciples being there with him now would have been hearing him saying, as often as they do this, we can remembrance of me. Not that they don't know what is a Passover, but now we're bringing them into the idea and the concept and the understanding that really and truly the Passover is more than just a feast to reflect on Exodus, the 12th chapter, but more so to focus on what this Lord, Yahushua, the Lamb that was without spot and blemish, is about to do for us. As that way he went into the details of the bread and the wine. He said, this is my body that is going to be broken for you. This is my blood. You understand? They don't just eat this and drink this and talk about Exodus 12. This is concerning me. This was a foreshadowing of what I will have to do for you all to cover you all from destruction, which ultimately would now represent this truth. This is what, because from the time of the disciples, the ancient apostles, 2,000 years ago to now, this is a revival of that. Because the Lord didn't come back again. The Lord didn't come back again in these times. The Lord, let me pull back that statement. The Lord didn't come in these times, in this 21st century, to go up on the cross again. The effects of what was done 2,000 years ago to the Lord shedding his blood and going through what he had to go through in his body has echoed into these times for us, right? Whereas it covers us in these times. So he's setting the mode even for us now, how we ought to keep the Passover, right? So now with that being said, let's read on in 1 Corinthians 11 and verses 25. He said, after the same manner also he took the cup when he had stopped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. The New Testament in his blood. It's within his blood, right? Whereas his bloodshed now gives us the right hand passage to that new covenant that we preach of, that King David as well yearned for. Because the yearning for the new covenant, like we yearn for now, didn't begin with us. It didn't begin with the old apostles of 2,000 years ago, believe it or not. The yearning of the new covenant actually began with King David. And this is something I love to highlight because it's right there in scripture, and I'll read it. And it's very important to identify this. Again, I call. Listen. Isaiah 55 and verse 30 and verse 3, sorry. It says, incline your ear and come unto me, hear, and your soul shall live. And I will make an everlasting covenant. Which the new covenant is, when you read the details of it, is something that is a covenant that will be established forever. Laws being placed within you, which would make you righteous, and righteousness is immortal. The new covenant goes hand in hand with Isaiah the 60th chapter and the 21st verse, where it says that people shall all be righteous. The no man have to teach his neighbor, know the Lord. You have the laws within here. That's righteousness it's speaking of, that we're going to be exhibiting from within and out, naturally. All right? From the little tender child to the grown up. It says, I will make an everlasting covenant, new covenant, with you, even, and even in old English is which is, or equal to. Even, or which is, or equal to, the sure mercies of David. The sure mercies of David. And the sure mercies of David was basically promised to us. And you have to understand what is the sure mercies of David. The sure mercies of David was promised that the Lord will have mercy upon, in Isaiah 14, he will have mercy upon Israel, and yet choose Jacob, right? And set them in their own land, right? But why is it referring to it as the mercies of David? David received a mercy. David sinned. And when David sinned, is where we get the Psalms 51, right? And what did David say? He said, I was shapen in iniquity. Only against you I acknowledge my transgression. These things David uttered. He was showing what? That guess what? The error is within me. The error is me. How I was shapen. That is why he went in and made that particular statement. I was shapen. When he's speaking about shapen, he's not speaking about his spirit, but he's speaking about his body. In sin did my mother conceive me. The creature was made subject to vanity. Every man from his youth is given to evil. These things the scripture says. Apostle Paul even went into it and he said, who shall deliver me from this vile body? He even likens it to what? A sinful body. Romans 8 chapter. So David acknowledged, what he was acknowledging is that, guess what? The error is within my flesh. According to the inward man, I want to do right. I want to do right. And this is what we yearn for. This is what we declare even in these times. According to the inward man, and this is what Apostle Paul even was declaring. You see another law warning in his members. Right? He talked about that inward man is renewed day by day. So where is this outward man? Where is this other man? Where is this other law? The flesh. The flesh. That was the problem. And even King David highlighted that. That's why in Psalms 119, sorry that this come like a video, right? But I had to go into it to fully express what Apostle Paul is going into, because Apostle Paul, the way he writes his letters, he wrote it deep, which if not taken into the right context, it could be swayed into wrong avenues and bring out, and that could form a heretic doctrine in itself, right? Psalms 119 and verses 5. Psalmist David, he said, "Oh that my ways," he said, "Oh that my ways were directed." And now we know that the ways of man are directed, right? Obvious, the scripture says that. Book of Proverbs, King Solomon wrote about it, right? That is not in man to direct his steps, right? The Lord directed his steps. Okay, so what is King David saying here? He said, "Oh that my ways were directed," but he said to keep thy statutes. To keep thy statutes. He know that his ways are directed, but he wants his ways, he was longing for his ways to be directed to keep the Lord's statutes. What is he asking for? He's asking for that new covenant where he'll be programmed, because the new covenant is a programming. He wants to be programmed to do right. Isn't that the new covenant? That's why it's also known as the sure mercies of David, because this is what David longed for after having sinned. And this is what the Lord is going to grant to David, the house of David, by extension. Right? And the blood of Yahushai is what initiates the right and passage to that sure mercy of David, or that new covenant. So reading again in 1 Corinthians 11 chapter. Let's hope this is edifying. 1 Corinthians 11 and verses verse 25. It says, "This cup," continue from there, "this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as oft as ye drink it in remembrance of me." Right? As I said, setting them into that right mode in which you should keep the Passover. "For as often as ye eat this bread and drink this cup, you do shew the Lord's death till he come." Right? It's very serious. It's not a plaything. This year is an event that led up to the Lord's death, as he said in Luke the 22nd chapter, as I just read. He said, "With desire have I desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." The mode of the Passover isn't a celebrative mode. It's a solemn assembly. The Lord was betrayed unto death that night. "Wherefore," verse 27, "whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord." You'll be guilty if you drink it unworthily. Now, when you go into the word unworthily, right? When you go into the word unworthily in 1 Corinthians 11 and 27, the word unworthily, G 371, it says, "in an unworthy manner," which goes back to the G 370, "unfit unfit for a thing, right? Unworthy. See if there's anything else. Right. So basically, you're eating it unfit, right? Unworthily, which, as we just mentioned, and as the mode that the passage gives us, the Apostle Paul gives us, is not to eat the Lord's Supper. So this ain't coming together just to eat. When we gather for the Passover, it's not just to eat and drink like a regular feast. This gathering together is to be in a specific mindset and mode and remembrance, as it clearly says, of the Lord. So first and foremost, when you come to eat the Passover, your mind has to be on the Lord. So there's a certain mind state you have to be in. There's a part of setting yourself in that worthy manner. That is why the apostles and elders, right, has heavily emphasized through the years, if a brother is young in the truth, a newcomer, a proselyte, if a brother is new in the faith, and he's not really grounded or he's not really affirmative of his faith and stance in this truth, do not encourage him into keeping the Passover. Don't try to force him. You can encourage him, and I'm going to use the right term. You can encourage him to keep the Passover to get himself right, because it's a serious thing, but do not try to force it upon him. Like, yeah, come and keep the Passover because the Passover is for you to keep. You know, that kind of way, without getting him into the understanding of what his truth represents. Because, as Makaza once said, you know, as we all agree, and we often use that statement as well, is that the whole truth is like a Passover. Because the mode that you would be in for the Passover, where you remember the Lord and you make sure you think like, you know, at that time of Passover, how the Spirit is be. You know, you want to tell your brother Salakia, you want to make sure everything right, you want to make sure that you're in the right mental state towards the Akim and the ministry, you want to make sure that you're sincere, you want to check yourself, you want to examine yourself, these different things, right? So as a spiritual examination, self-examination. Back then, in Exodus, the 12th chapter, and verses 44, 144, no coincidence, right? There was a specific mode you had to be into to eat. To eat, you had to be what? Circumcised. You had to be circumcised. And now, circumcision, the circumcision of today is more so in your heart. The circumcision of today is more so in your heart. See if I can get that. It has it in Jeremiah as well. But I want to get it in the New Testament. Jeremiah 4:4 is what I was talking about. It has it in also Deuteronomy 10:16, right? So you could read those precepts when you get chance. Deuteronomy 10 and 16, Jeremiah 4:4, right? I want to get it how the New Testament has it. Boom, boom, boom. Right. So I have one here in the book of Galatians chapter 6 and verses 15. It says, for in Yahushua HaMashiach neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creature. But a what? A new creature. And what is important to understand what was happening back then. Why Apostle Paul had to address to the church in Galatia that circumcision availeth nothing and uncircumcision availeth nothing. They had a big separation based on circumcision and uncircumcision back then. But the circumcision would have represented those that would have known the laws, practiced the laws, they were affiliated with their commonwealth. Uncircumcision would have represented those, right, that were alienated from their commonwealth. They did not keep all the different Jewish customs and practices, so they might not have been even circumcised physically. Because coming out of the Hellenistic period, because before we reached the time of Apostle Paul and which was under the Roman Empire, we had the Grecian Empire, right prior to it, right prior to the Roman Empire. Whereas we read in Maccabees that a lot of them was put to death for circumcising the children under Antiochus Epiphanes. A lot of them made themselves uncircumcised, right? Whereas they would have done things that are not according to the law. They would have made league with the heathen, started acting like the heathen, they became Hellenized. So this is what they would have passed down to the children. So we're dealing now with a whole uncircumcised generation. Because from the time the fathers give in to the Hellenization, the children also going to be brought up, because it was even unlawful for a man to call himself a Jew. So they would not have been keeping Jewish customs and traditions and acts like circumcision even so, right? But there were those that were in the land at that time of the Lord that would have upheld and stuck to the circumcision customs, the keeping of the laws to the T, right? They would not have been heavily altered or changed by that Hellenistic period, you know, keeping their laws and coming back to their order and whatnot. These would have been known as the circumcision, and they would have considered the other Israelites that were Hellenized, affected by the Hellenization heavily, they would have considered them as uncircumcision, right? But Apostle Paul is saying here, for in Yahushua HaMashiach, neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creature. Is all about becoming a new creature. That's the main emphasis. I can't look down on you because your penis foreskin ain't cut, right, and think that I could condemn you because your penis foreskin and cut. It's deeper than that. It is deeper than that. This is about belief. This is about understanding. This is about sincerity. And now, of my personal belief, I believe if a brother is sincere, if a brother is about this truth and walking in the footsteps of our forefathers, as the scripture says, seek the old paths wherein is a good way, I believe that brother will physically get circumcised. That's what I believe. I believe that brother will physically get himself circumcised. And I believe the book of Romans, the 4th chapter, right, where it speaks about our forefather Abraham and whatnot. I will send that piece of favor when I get it. The exact one I'm looking for. I went through this with this is brother name again, Yara. I went through this with Yara, right? And he saw it. He saw it perfectly. It was a yapper lesson, right? And while going through the lesson with him, I myself was further enlightened. It was beautiful. I tell you through the Spirit that we on the right track. There's a balance within it, in the sense of men who got circumcised in this truth, they didn't get circumcised in vain. The circumcision was not in vain. Those seeds has been in vain. Can cutting off your foreskin and your penis save you? No, it cannot. But at the same time, the men that got circumcised physically did not circumcise themselves in vain. That has also its lot, and it has its value where it comes to walking in the steps of our forefather Abraham. And he expresses that, Apostle Paul does express that in the book of Romans, right? So I myself would encourage any brother that comes into this truth, don't be afraid, be willing to walk in that footstep or that pattern of your forefathers in getting yourself circumcised. It's not that you force it upon you that you have to do this, right? Or you ain't gonna be saved. But to walk, as I said, to walk in them footsteps of the forefather Abraham, which he was physically circumcised, do it. Do the thing. If we have the ability, it's not like we living in a world where we can't afford to do it. It's against the law. Because if it was against the government law to get circumcised, and a boy can get circumcised to live within the borders of the law of the land, then all well and good. He ain't going to be condemned because he didn't get circumcised. Forget what I'm saying? Because as Apostle Paul made mention of, right? And as it's made mention of through all the scriptures in the New Testament especially, it's not just about circumcision. Alright? But let me just finish this off because I'm going kind of long here. Let's not. I find like this thing look like it's sticking. Let's not. It's 1 Corinthians 11 and verses 27 again. It says, wherefore whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. So what is of priority, or what is the heading of this, or the context of this here? What is the heading? Because apart from, as Exodus 12:44 says, only circumcised is supposed to eat. The circumcision is more of the heart. So being that the circumcision is more of the heart, the unworthily will more so be you not being in that right mental state to partake. Not being grounded in the faith, not being a firm believer in your house to partake. With the firm believers, as I mentioned to you, I believe the firm believers would make that step. It's again, themselves really circumcised physically, right? So it all wraps up together. It's a package. Okay, shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord, like treading it under your foot now. Like we say in Hebrews, the 10th chapter, how much sorrow punishment shall be upon them, right? That basically take the Lord's blood and his sacrifice for naught. Think little of it and treat it anyhow. The Passover is not to come. That's why men who came into the truth and was not sincere and come and sit down amongst men and break bread, and them have to remember what happened to Judas. That's why he said the night that he took bread was betrayed. What happened to the betrayer? What happened to the man that ate unworthily? He got his judgment. He was an example of a man that ate unworthily. He would have been physically circumcised. He would have been physically circumcised, but his mind was on betraying. He wasn't really of us. And if you're not of us, he's a betrayer. If you're not a firm believer in the Lord, he's a betrayer. And Judas, when they go into Judas wasn't a believer in the Lord. Judas didn't really believe in the Lord. Judas, when they go into him, he actually stemmed off from one of them zealot groups. And he came around the ministry, thinking to himself that Yahushua would be the one to stir up some kind of physical rebellion. And also he was a thief, because he had the bag, and it had the juncture where the woman came with the alabaster box and the ointments. And he said, what kind of waste is this? This could have been stolen and given to the poor. And the scriptures made mention that it's not because he cared for no poor. He didn't care for no poor, right? But that he was a fucking thief. And he sit down in the Passover and he break bread and he eat. He eat unworthily because he was in the wrong mind state. He had the wrong spirit. So this is what most Apostle Paul is going into. You cannot partake in this Lord's Supper or Passover with the wrong mind frame, the wrong spirit. You have to be a sincere fellow. If you're not sincere and eating the Passover, brother man, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it, real talk. And not just the Passover, but if you're going through this entire truth and you're not sincere, You ain't gonna make it. That's why the unleavened bread represented sincerity. Alright? You gotta be sincere. You gotta be about this. You gotta be in the street because you believe the testimony of Yahweh Shai, the testimony that was given. You believe in that. You believe Yahweh Shai is the only way out. You believe he was the one sent from on high. You believe that he's the one that is going to return again. So therefore now you represent him. So therefore now you live your life in a way that he would be pleased. You live a life in a way that would represent what he stands for. Make full proof of the ministry and these things. It's all about the ministry. And you would know when a guy making full proof of the ministry, or when a guy is even about the ministry. First, you have to be about it to make full proof of it. You have to be about it. There's steps that a man who about the truth would take in bettering himself, right? In getting himself to a point where he could make full proof of the ministry. You see them guys who come into the truth, that's some of them is coming silently. Isn't the way again that? That's some of them is coming silently. They're quiet fellas, you know. They don't talk much, right? But they will just come around and they just stagnant, they just stuck. They ain't learning. They ain't growing at all. They don't get trouble, eh? They don't get trouble. You don't hear them getting, falling out with brothers, and they're just quiet. And as pertaining to the doctrine and the nurturing and the learning of the word, they're slow bellies. And not that be a man being slow condemns him. I'm not saying a man being slow condemns him, but they're slow bellies in the terms of they ain't really developed as they're supposed to be years going by, and they ain't learning, and they ain't even making an effort. They're slothful in business. They had a sluggard, fold your arms, laid back spirit. That's them who not sincere about it. They don't understand what this is about. And then just come keeping Passover and keeping Passover. Hey, Passover again, let me get my staff. Passover again, I wash my garment and I look sharp for the Passover. But they don't even understand what the Passover represents. They don't even understand why we doing these things. Why we keeping up with these high holy days. You know the scripture says through faith. Through faith Moses kept the Passover. This thing is to be done through faith in the Lord. You have to believe in the Lord. And if you believe in the Lord, there's a more they would be in. They know what the Lord looking for, and because you believe in the Lord, you're trying to do and meet that measure that the Lord requires you to be at. Right? Verses 28. It says, but let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. You gotta examine yourself. You gotta check yourself. Am I just doing things for contention's sake? Am I doing things to be seen of men, just to be seen? Or am I really sincere? Behind closed doors, what are you doing? When you're not in front of the Akim, is it the same, you use that same brother that always emphasizing on doing the right thing? Are you that same individual? Are you that same individual that loves Yahweh Shai? Behind closed doors, are you behaving yourself wisely within your own house, in the secret places? Kindness, how well do you exercise charity, brotherly love? How well do you apply the traits that was given, the spirit of virtue? Remember, it's a package. It's a package. The scripture say, add to yourself virtue, add to diligence. Give diligence and make a call and election sure. When you apply these things, as the scripture says, if a man will purge himself of these, which it talks about purging out the whole leaven, if a man will purge himself of these, he will become what? A vessel fit for the master's use. The Lord will have use for you. So that means what? If it's a vessel fit for the master's use, think about it. Think about it of a master of a house. It has one set of vessels in the house. It has vase, it has all kind of things. What you think the master going and do with the vessels that he has no use for? He going and put the vessels out. The vessels that he has no use for, he going and throw them outside. They going and go outside with him with the garbage truck. That's what people do at Christmas time, right? And they clean the house, the thing that they don't have no more use for, they put it outside by the road. So when he say you're going to be a vessel fit for the master's use, he's referring to the fact that once you purge yourself and examine yourself in this truth, you will remain within the house. He will keep you in his house. You are used for that. You see that there? I use for that. And that's what we want to be. We want to be of that criteria where the Lord could say, yeah boy, I will keep brother Yakal. I will keep brother Matanai. I will keep brother Kwana. I will keep brother Nachamia. I will keep brother Kalab. I will keep brother Hawad. I will keep brother Yassan. I will keep brother Yaradan. Because them fellas and them checking themselves. Them fellas and them fit for my use. I could use them to edify. I could use their lives and their examples, right? And I could use their patterns, to show forth to the world. Their light go shine. And men go see and glorify the Father which is in heaven. But how we gonna keep a man and use a man just day? Going back to the individuals, I tell you, a man just day and he just cool. He ain't growing, he ain't nothing, he just quiet, come around, eat and he drink, get shower, and gone. You don't really fellowship much. You don't really have been seen that he really about it now, boy. How I go use it? That why it's no surprise. That fellas, I telling you, that fellas I see, like especially from deceased Rahib camp. That fellas I telling you, I say, where is that man going to? He used to look so quiet. It had those of them that used to look so quiet, I telling you. You would doubt them would fall out because you're trying to, when you're not coming to the truth, you're trying to understand what is humility now. You know, so you hear and be humble, you know, cast off all pride. So you might think to yourself at first impression, you might think to yourself that being humble is just being quiet. Which being quiet, being a silent fella is a part of it. Being humble. But you know, to humble your tongue, you know, humble yourself, when to speak, when not to speak, these things. But have a difference with a man who humble sincerely and a man who just quiet and day. A man who quiet and day, I don't fear for he because he's showing signs of uncertainty. The scripture says, I believe, therefore have I spoken. You see, belief, this comes with a kind of outpouring. And you could speak through your actions, you could speak. No, that you best type of speaking through your actions. So I believe, therefore have I spoken. Even so, going into that is a deeper sense where you believe, so you know your lifestyle speaking. Your character about you and the truth speaking for you. What type of brother are you? When we gather to fellowship, what is your conversations? What is your conversation in your daily life? How do you order your household? What type of principles do you establish within your household? Do you transfer the teachings and the ordinances given to you into your household? Or is this a front that you're just putting on when you're amongst the Akyam? That is when it gets serious. You understand? The Lord ain't looking at you. The Lord don't be looking at you to see what you're doing only when you're in front of the Akyam. We cannot fool the Lord. Cannot fool the Lord. The Lord looking at your lifestyle. Them angels always there. Them angels will that pop up when you reach by the Akyam. Them angels always watch it there. Right now as I speak, we're being watched. 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 29. 28 again. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation, damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. Let's go into the word discerning. The word discerning in 1 Corinthians 11 and verses 29, G1252, it says to separate thoroughly, literally and reflexively, to withdraw from, oppose, to discriminate, to discern, to make a distinction, right? Right, to judge. So, not discerning the Lord's body would be you not judging the Lord's body. Listen to what I'm saying? Because to judge is to scrutinize. To judge also is to identify. Because when you go before the judges have to identify what is the error here, what is the uncleanness, what is the fault, and then what is the penalty. So there's an identification in judging. Like the spiritual man judges all things. But the spiritual man will spiritually examine things and bring out the result and the cause of things through the spirit. So when you're not discerning the Lord's body, when you're not judging the Lord's body, you're not seeing the Lord's body for what it is. You're not identifying, you're not making that clear distinction and identification of this body of the Lord being what it is exactly, which what it is a holy thing. It's a serious thing, it's a solemn thing. Being a part of this truth is a solemn thing. You have to discern the Lord's body. And then verses 30, you want to say, for this cause, many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. For this cause, many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. And that is in a literal sense. And you can bring it also to a spiritual sense. Not eating the Passover worthily, not being a part of this truth sincerely. The Lord could make you weak, sickly, or you could even die. Or in a spiritual sense, you can become spiritually weak. You can become spiritually sick. Whereas you start to get sick in your mind. You start to believe all kind of wayward doctrine, right? And then you could go to sleep. You could go back into the world. Dead. So Lord willing, I hope, I don't want to prolong it any further. Alright, so I hope this was edifying. 1 Corinthians 11 from 26 to 30. Shalom.